Howdy goons, I put out a poll asking subscribers if they knew what Hall effect sticks were on controllers. Half of you have never heard of them, 15% said that they don't know what they are but have heard of them, and the rest said that they have heard of them and either have them or don't. As someone who has a controller with them, I can't really go back to using other sticks, so I thought I'd tell you all about them, and if you're someone who has a Switch or a Swooby, a Switch 2, I highly recommend you get one soon. Well, as soon as they're available. The simplest way to explain Hall effect sticks is that through the magic of technology, we have controllers with special doohickey sticks. These sticks are designed in such a way that makes it so that they will potentially never drift. Or they will eventually, but it takes a really long time. Now, you might think that because this is a recent tech, that it'd be expensive. Surprise, it's not new. It's very old, actually. Also, every Hall effect controller I've bought has been $30 or less. One I ordered recently is only 16 bucks on AliExpress, or $20 if you order it from the maker themselves, GameSir. The detailed version, though. You know how the sticks in the original Switch Joy-Con had really bad stick drift? It was an inevitability, essentially. It wasn't if they'd get stick drift, but when. Well, it had to do with the stick's design. For me and many other people, the main feature we wanted on the Swooby's Joy-Con wasn't a mouse mode. We wanted Hall effect sticks. Once you know what they are and you've used them and how they're much less likely to get drift, you can imagine why we'd want them on the $80 controller. But it's more important in the situation of a Switch Lite. After all, you can't just replace the Joy-Con on a Switch Lite. In a normal controller, you have two potentiometers. One for the left and right, which is the x-axis, and one for up and down, which is the y-axis. As you move the stick, it makes physical contact with the pad, creating a positive or negative charge in the voltage. If these potentiometer were of an inferior quality, they might make contact more aggressively, resulting in false positives and wear. These potentiometer and their accuracy also decline over time from frequent use. That's because these are physical objects constantly rubbing against each other and coming into contact. Even if you have the smoothest objects in the world, them constantly rubbing on each other will result in friction, grinding them away over time. This sort of puts an expiration date on all potentiometer-based analog sticks. But this is basically the problem with the Joy-Con on the Switch 1. Nintendo used potentiometers with cheap plastic internals that grinded down faster than a quality potentiometer would. Hall effect sticks, however, use magnets and sensors instead of physical contacts and electric input like potentiometers. At the base of each Hall effect stick is a magnet, and as you move it, it's detected by the magnetic field of the sensor surrounding the stick. It detects the movement of the stick without ever coming into direct contact with it. This results in a more durable and precise stick. Sounds like magic, right? You gotta love magnets. If you're just hearing about these now, it's because they've grown in popularity seemingly overnight. But the technology for these sticks have existed for longer than some of you have even been alive. This means that the tech is not only accessible, but affordable too. There are video game consoles in the past that have used these sticks, such as the Dreamcast controller. If this technology has been around forever, and it's cheap, why wouldn't a company use it? Easy. They make more money by not using it. Companies make more money when you have to replace your controller. To me, this seems like a bad idea because if my controller were to start sucking, I wouldn't buy from that same company again. I like the Switch and the Switch 2, but you have to keep in mind that Nintendo did just come back from their worst performing system. Nintendo is also an incredibly out-of-touch company. They might not know that we want Hall effect sticks. They might not know what they are, or they really like the idea of us having to routinely replace an $80 controller. On the other Cheeto dust-covered paw, I don't think it's entirely intentional. It's hard to know why Nintendo actually chooses to use them. Maybe it's just because they've always used them. For the most part, that's the big reason, to make more money off of you. It's called planned obsolescence. It happens in our everyday lives. This is when a company intentionally designs a product to fail over time so that you'll replace them. If your sticks drift at the right time, you'll think it's normal wear and tear and buy a new controller. But the Switch 1 Joy-Con failed so fast that you had to know that it was bad design, and potentially maliciously so. They chose to not use Hall effect on the Swooby Joy-Con as well, despite packing them full of a bunch of other features that no one asked for. I've also had viewers tell me that their Swooby Joy-Con already has drift. It hasn't happened to me yet, though. Let's not target only Nintendo here, though. All companies have been doing this. Say your Xbox controller drifts, you might think to replace it with their expensive Elite controller with special drift-resistant sticks. Also, companies sell their consoles at a loss and make their money back through accessory and software sales. You might be thinking, wouldn't making a better product result in more sales? Unfortunately, I have to blame my favorite scapegoat, capitalism. capitalism. There's a history of companies making good products that don't break, and they don't greatly overcharge, and they don't push you to buy a new product from them yearly, and they don't do planned obsolescence. Those companies go out of business. For a non-gaming company example, let's talk about the Instant Pot. This is a line of pressure cookers that people were going crazy for. They're quick, safe, and useful. For those who don't know, the standard pressure cooker is essentially a time bomb, and if something goes wrong with it, well, kaboom. No more pressure cooker, and now boiling hot water is splashed all over your kitchen. I've used them for sterilization in the past. I've used them to help grow mushrooms, the eating kind, for food, not the, wacky fun time kind. But for the average person, these are scary and expensive devices to use. So when Instant Pot came along and offered an affordable, friendly, and durable alternative, they exploded, but in the good way, overnight. The problem is, Instant Pot had to file for bankruptcy. That's because the Instant Pot is so good that anyone who bought one never needed to replace it. They never needed to buy a new one. Even if you sell the best product in the world, if you don't overcharge for it, you will go out of business. It's impossible for a company to expand indefinitely if people only need to buy one thing once from them. If everyone already has an Instant Pot, then there isn't anyone left to sell one to. Eventually, they would go out of business because they need yearly purchases in order to keep the business going. Now, for a gaming example, 8BitDo is a company that uses Hall effect sticks and sells very cheap controllers using them. So how do they stay afloat? They give consumers a ton of options and incentives to buy from them a lot. 8BitDo is constantly improving their controller designs with more features and in new or familiar shapes. For example, the Ultimate 2C is their most popular controller. It has Hall effect, 2 bonus mappable shoulder buttons, an awesome D-pad, and a great shape, and it's only $30. This isn't 8BitDo's only controller though. They make controllers for all sorts of niche uses, like their Micro and Zero controllers. These controllers don't feature any joysticks at all, but have all of the other buttons that you'd need. This makes them the perfect controller for playing emulators. They're also way cheaper. They can even fit on a keychain, making them the perfect portable controller for things like Mario Kart or spontaneous Tetris matches with friends, in the case that you want to use them for hotkeys. I use a controller to edit my videos, and these could be really good for that too. That probably popped up some questions. I use the controller in my left hand as like a hotkey thing. It's so that I have all these buttons in my left hand, and then I use the mouse with my right hand. I don't use the analog stick for mouse controls or anything like that. But 8BitDo also sells Genesis-style controllers, fight pads, NES-style, SNES-style, all sorts of retro styles, even mice. These huge buttons, which might seem dumb, would be great for Mustache, and they constantly come out with cool new designs and colors. But since they make standard Xbox-style and Switch Pro-style controllers, the average buyer is unlikely to buy just one thing from them. I own 2 8BitDo controllers, for example. The N30 Pro for retro games on my computer, because it doesn't work with my Switch 2, and also because the D-pad is amazing, and the Ultimate 2C wireless version, which also doesn't work with my Switch 2, because out of the 5 Ultimate controllers, I bought the one that turns out it can't connect to the Switch 2. I think in the future, though, we'll see a move to first-party companies using Hall effect sticks too, and that's because I tell everyone I know about Hall effect controllers, and how they're not just better, but cheaper. If I sold you a controller without Hall effects and you get stick drift, now that you know about these alternatives, would you buy another controller from me again? Probably not. So listen up, Nintendo, Xbox, Sony. If the controller you include with the system gets drift, I'm not buying another controller from you. I'm buying from a third-party company like GameSir, 8BitDo, or GuliKit. As for my N30 Pro, it's just so old at this point that it won't ever get an update, so even 8BitDo engages in a little bit of planned obsolescence on the side. One day they decided that the N30 Pro was old news, that it didn't need any more updates. But when the controllers are this cheap, I don't mind having to replace the controller once a decade. I'd rather buy only 10 controllers in my entire lifetime than have to buy 1,000 controllers. You might also want different controllers that are Hall effect for different purposes. For example, stick length can make a huge difference. Sorry fellas, size does matter this time. Your stick length will affect your performance in shooters. This might be common knowledge by now, but the shorter your control stick, the less precise it is. That's because the length of the stick affects the size of the tilt zones when you move them with your thumb. This, like magnets, is also super sciencey, but the longer the stick, the wider the range of movement that is translated to the base. So basically, if your sticks are longer, you have more control. The easiest way to explain this is how I used to use FPS Freaks. They're a company that sells stick extensions. They just snap onto your control sticks. When I was playing Call of Duty, before using those sticks, I played on a 4 sensitivity. Then when I got the FPS Freaks, I was comfortably playing on an 8 sensitivity, but it still felt like I was playing on a lower sensitivity. This gives you an advantage because a higher sensitivity can make up for a slower reaction time by saving you time on doing a 180. Buttons are also a major reason as to why you might want multiple controllers. For some games, that disgusting disc D-pad is great, but for many games, the standard plus shape is ideal. I also want additional mappable buttons on my controllers like back paddles or bonus bumpers, anything to make it so I don't have to take my thumb off the sticks to reload or jump. You might even want a controller that doesn't have sticks for emulation like the Zero and Micros that I mentioned earlier. Like, I love having both analog sticks at the bottom, but I know some people who say it's worse than chewing glass. There are as many options as there are gamers, so it's easier to stay in business with Hall effect sticks if you're willing to make a large variety of designs and playstyles, which most companies do. Now, interestingly, Hall effects can be used for more than just analog sticks. They can be used in triggers to detect how far you're holding down the trigger. Imagine what could be done with Hall effects if they were put into standard buttons. Well, you don't have to imagine, they exist. You know how you can half tilt an analog stick and your character will walk slowly instead of moving full speed? Imagine if your keyboard had Hall effect and you could half press your keys to walk slower. This would be fantastic in stealthier competitive shooters where hearing footsteps is really powerful. Hall effects, of course, aren't perfect either. There will be something better to come along in the future, I'm sure. That's because even though there isn't a potentiometer to rub against, there are still physical parts in the joystick itself. So even a Hall effect controller will still experience things like increased dead zone sizes over time. There can also be poorly designed Hall effect sticks. There are Hall effect controllers that do get drift. So in the future, we may even see companies putting in Hall effects, but opting for low quality ones. But even bad Hall effect sticks are better than the average potentiometer stick. Always look at reviews from people who have used these controllers long term now. But yeah, comparing it to the Instant Pot wasn't really a perfect example because the Instant Pot is essentially perfect. You're never going to encounter a perfect controller. The problem with Hall effect sticks though is that these are treated as the new default. Lots of people won't buy a new controller unless it has Hall effect in it. As I said though, there are bad Hall effect sticks. So this could result in every company adopting them just to adopt them poorly and cheaply so that you can slap the magical Hall effect name on the box to guarantee the sales. This in the long term can result in an overall decline in stick quality and the name of Hall effect that might be worse than had they just used good potentiometers. I think it's more important that the control sticks are high quality regardless of whether they're Hall effect or not. But right now, Hall effect stuff does tend to be of a pretty good quality, and right now it's pretty safe to just recommend you several companies that do use good Hall effect controllers. I think you should be more concerned about whether the controller is good than whether the Hall effect is good. But some of y'all are paying a whole lot extra for controllers that are a whole lot worse than these $30 ones. I don't particularly care if something has Hall effect or not per se, just that the controller is good long term. But back to the Switch 2. There's a lot wrong with the Joy-Con in my opinion. Playing Fortnite absolutely reeks using the Joy-Con. The sticks are way shorter than a standard controller. Halfway through my stream I was like, alright, I get the point. Let's go back to playing it on my PC. My sticks work just fine, they're just too short. I also don't like that the D-pad is individual buttons. I like an actual D-pad. The triggers aren't actual triggers, and of course, the Switch 2 still uses potentiometer sticks, and some have reported having drift. I personally want my Joy-Con to stay usable in portable mode as long as possible, so I don't really want to use my Switch 2 controller dock and put unneeded wear and tear on it. But my Ultimate 2C wireless version still doesn't have an official firmware update, keyword being official. So I bought a new wired controller called the Tegenaria, or Tegenaria? I don't know how to pronounce it, never seen the word before. But that won't be in for a few more days yet. But I think if you're someone who has a Switch 2 and you're tired of replacing your controllers, you really need to keep an eye out for these Hall effect controllers. Like right now, you could just get the 8BitDo Bluetooth version, the Ultimate 2C Bluetooth version. It's $30. Make sure that it says Bluetooth in the name. Don't get the one that says wireless in the name like I did, or else you'll be stuck with a controller that doesn't work with your Switch 2 yet. But make sure you use your Joy-Con as little as possible when you're in docked mode until we start getting those third-party Joy-Con. You don't want them to get drift and then be stuck using them when you want to play portable. The problem is it's really hard to recommend controllers right now. I don't really know for sure which ones are compatible with the Switch 2. There isn't really a reason why my 2C wireless shouldn't work. It works perfectly fine with a PC or an Android phone. There are wired Switch controllers that work fine, and even the Swooby has an A/B swap setting in case you're using an Xbox layout controller. But my third-party GameCube adapter doesn't work. I've used a Power A brand wireless controller as well, and it worked, but holy crap, does the buttons on these controllers suck. They also feel cheap and light. I imagine Hori wired ones work as well, but those are also very cheap feeling. But since the Switch 2 rails are entirely different, none of your third-party Joy-Con from the Switch 1 will work unless it's something like the Hori split pad where it can be docked onto a corded dock. The Nitro deck also just won't work now. So as of right now, in the launch month, I really don't have any controller recommendations besides the 8BitDo Bluetooth 2C. Right now, the best controller you can get for the system is any of the ones that you have that currently work. Hall effect are great, and I'm personally setting some money aside for when a third-party Swooby Swooby Joy-Con comes out with good Hall effect. Until then, I am being very careful with my Swooby stock Joy-Cons. Thanks for watching. Bye. Bye 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 bye.